question that I just thought of.
Oh yeah.
Can you explain the meditation on?
Desire, my great enemy, with his soldiers surrounding me, is giving me lots of trouble. Oh my Lord, he is giving me lots of trouble. Oh my Lord, he is giving me lots of trouble. Oh my Lord. That great enemy I will deceive, remaining in the castle of peace, night and day in thy joy, O Lord. Night and day in thy joy, O Lord. In thy joy, night and day, in thy joy, O Lord. What will be my fate? Oh Lord, tell me. Pranayam be thy religion. Pranayam will give thee salvation. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is beloved God. Pranayam is Creator Lord. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Control thee, little pranayam, become all-pervading pranayam. You won't have to fear anything anymore. You won't have to fear anything anymore. You won't have to fear anything Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Great Masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashai, Swami Shri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, Sri Patanjali, Adi Shankaracharya, we invoke your wisdom. Swami Kriyananda, our friend and guide, we bow at your feet, all of you. Open our hearts to your love, our hands to thy service, our minds to thy wisdom. Make us free. Om. Peace. Amen. So let's meditate a little bit. We're going to be talking at one point about pranayam, And I'd like to be indulged a little bit with some meditation variations. So let's sit upright. We'll do basically 12 rounds of 4-part breathing, which I'll explain, 8 counts of watching the breath in the spine, and then a little bit of silence. So sit upright. Open the heart even as we close the doors of the temple of our daily activities. 4-part breathing means to hold the breath both in and out. We'll do the breathing nasally as we do most normal pranayams, but we'll do some variations which I hope at least some of you will find helpful. What I'd like to do is have us breathe in, and as we do so, draw, as it were, by imagination and imagery, the breath up from the navel, past the sternum between the breasts, along the throat, through the nose and up to the spiritual eye, where we'll hold the breath. So we'll come up to a 7 count, hold for 3 to 4, and then when we exhale the breath, have the tepid breath pour back towards the medulla, out through the medulla and back down the back. So up the front and out the back. At the end of the exhalation, we'll hold the breath out for another 3 to 4 counts. Then when we do the 12, when we hold at the top, I'll offer the image, or the name rather, of one of our masters to help focalize our devotion. So first we'll do a few rounds of just practicing the technique, and then we'll do 12 as described. So chest up, shoulders down, a few practice rounds. Begin the inhalation up the front of the body through the nose. Now hold the breath at the point between the eyebrows calmly. Exhale down through the medulla, down the back of the body, the back of the vertebrae. Hold the breath out. Now inhale. You can use the soothing throat sound if you know how to do it. Hold the breath at the top gently, holding the reins of concentration lightly. Now pour the spirit down through the back, out through the medulla, like a warm, gentle waterfall. One more practice round. Inhale slowly. Hold the breath 3 or 4 counts. Exhale down through the back. Rest there at the bottom of the Sushumna. Now let's begin. We'll do 12. Inhale. Inhale. Hold, I bow to thee, Lord Jesus Christ. Exhale. Pause and rest, the breath held out. Inhale. Hold the breath. Om Namo Mahavatar Babaji. Exhale. Feel the warmth coming down the back, the spine. Rest there at the bottom. Inhale. Om Namo Yogavatar Lahiri. Exhale. Rest. Inhale. Hold. Om Namo Jnanavatar Sri Yukteswarji. Exhale. Rest. Inhale. Hold the breath. I bow to thee, O Guruji. Exhale. Rest. Inhale. Hold the breath. Sri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Exhale. Inhale. Hold. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Exhale. Inhale. Hold the breath. Om Namo Sri Patanjali. Exhale. Inhale. Hold. Om Namo Shankaracharya. Exhale. Inhale. Hold. Om Namo Rajasi Janakananda. Exhale. Inhale. Hold. Om Namo Gyanamata. Exhale. And last one, inhale. Hold the breath. I bow at thy feet, Swamiji, Kriyananda. Exhale. Resume natural breathing, but rest quietly in the spine. Feel the presence of the masters and saints whom we have invoked. See if your breath rate has slowed, heart rate. The mind is clearer, the body relaxed and warm, the heart at rest. Let's do 8 rounds of watching the breath in the spine, 8 rounds with the 8 aspects. Instead of the mantra Hong Sa, mentally chant as you come up the spine, observing the breath without control. Say simply, until breath becomes mind. And when the breath comes down, I'll say it out loud, and mind becomes peace. Let's begin. Observe the next breath rising, chanting until breath becomes mind. The breath comes out and mind becomes peace. And let the breath rest at the bottom. The mind becomes wise. Breath becomes mind. And mind becomes energy. Love descends the spine. Mind becomes space. Mind becomes Om. And light. And joy. And finally, for a brief period of sitting, concentrate now on the medulla. Sitting in a theater, gazing up at the screen at the point between the eyebrows. Listen inside the right ear. you're settled there, alternate your listening with gazing, peering quietly with great interest at the spiritual eye. Calmly rotate your seeing with hearing, creating a current of prana rising and coming back. The ego offering into seeing, seeing enlightening the ego. Back and forth, this current of energy, listening and seeing. Let's close now with a simple affirmation. We'll do it more quietly. From pools of inner silence, I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace. With quiet intensity from pools of inner silence, I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace. Sip now those waters pouring in through the spiritual eye, bathing the mind of impurities, bringing health, healing, and light into every cell. From pools of inner silence, I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace. Om Shanti, Shanti. Okay, well, welcome everyone. A couple of things came up last week afterwards. Didn't get any formal questions, or you just asked me something. What was it? Right, meditation on space. I'm sure there's several places, but in the one that comes to my mind is metaphysical meditations. Yogananda Master has the meditation on space, and he says, he describes it this way, which is always what stuck with me and inspired me in my life to practice it, which is, he says, if the body of God is space, if you meditate on space, you can feel God's presence. And of course, we have the body scan technique where you, both in Hatha and Raja, and where you visualize space entering through the feet and through the pores and, as it were, dissolving the body. And you know the one exercise in energization, actually it's my favorite, the last one, which is very apropos to what we just did or what I intended to do, which is you hold the breath out. And two things happen in that. You get a taste, a new student anyway, gets a taste of breathlessness. You know, like they send the astronauts up in a jet and they try to go as high as they can, and then they come down, and for a few seconds they float around in the cabin. You ever see that? You know, it's like climbing to a high altitude without oxygen. And because that's what we're doing in meditation. We're outgrowing our need for oxygen and other things too. But because there's no real meditation until we're breathless. And so, and in the Hong Sau technique in the Raja course, he talks about, we don't really say this much, but he talks about visualizing the breath, of course here, as we do, gradually feeling it as space. And so the breath, which you're following up and down with Hong Sau, you begin to feel is space, and you dissolve. All of these are ways by which we, like Einstein, convert the mass into energy, the energy into mind, which is space. I mean, space has no time and thought has no time and space. So it's a way of sort of dissolving body consciousness. Sometimes when you meditate, like especially with us together, it's easier, but at home too. And you get very still and try to feel the space in which you sit. And that too has sort of a different form of dissolving the body. Instead of dissolving the body from the inside, you dissolve it from the outside, which is you feel, and that's how Swami taught us in teaching too, is to try to feel the space that you occupy and all the thoughts there and so forth. So I don't know if any of that, maybe that's kind of wacky, but it's the best I can do. But another thing came up too, which Morley and I were comparing notes. I didn't take the time to research this, but somewhere in my notes, and it might have been in one of the slides, but anyway, in the book, Swami talks about this question or this recommendation that's pretty common to most of us in the room, which is to not get all that engaged with things like television and the news and so forth. So the question came up, well, to what extent, at what point, does that turning your back on the world become negation? At what point is it irresponsible morally, perhaps even, to not pay attention to what's happening in the world around us? I don't think it is, unless it is, meaning unless there's a rejection there or an indifference or an aloofness or an uncaring attitude. But other than that, I'll never forget so many years ago hearing Swami describe the news as gossip. At the time, I was rather insulted, because I watched the news and so forth. And, but gradually I listened to that and began to listen carefully. And if you still do watch the news, listen carefully, turn on 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, whatever they do, and count how many things are actually facts. Usually it's, what do you think, Joe? What do you think the president's going to do? Because whatever they did, the government shut down. And I don't know who Joe is. I could care less who Joe is. He may know a lot more than me, but it's still just a stupid opinion. And open a newspaper or the internet. Most of it is somebody's opinion about this, that, or something that hasn't even happened yet. It's like a sitcom. I remember years ago, I used to one of the few things I could do and didn't mind doing, even like to do, would be like paint rooms and houses and stuff. I've had a series of those things in my life. But what I liked to do most was open the newspapers and put them on the floor. Hours later, I'd still be reading the newspapers. And then I realized it didn't matter what the date was. Somebody died, there was an earthquake here, and it just really didn't much matter. Nothing I could do about any of that stuff. So, I do have my little ways of staying up to date, my Time magazine, my internet little blippy things that from the New York Times that says what happened. Most of it's really irrelevant. But so sure, but what are you going to do about it? Does it upset you? They even make the rain forecast for tomorrow seem like something you've got to find out. There's agitation in it. I mean, it's so stupid. That's the only word I have for it. It's stupid, or as his word was gossip. And I think that's really the more accurate word, is it's gossip. So sure, stay in touch. offer your love to people who are in crisis, and if you can maybe donate something to a big event or something, great, we do that too. But if you're not going to do anything about it, can't do anything about it, let it go. You know, when I see people arguing about politics, or the worst thing in the world is you hear people getting all engaged with a sitcom. Oh, did you hear so-and-so did that? I don't even know who they're talking about. And it's totally unreal. And they're you know, you see these little internet headlines, and I wonder what that's about. And I realize it's a TV show. Or novel, but I don't really read novels. But anyway, so that's, I think, you know, yes, feel compassion, but for heaven's sakes, if it's not your world, do something positive elsewhere. Okay, so we're going to do some fun stuff tonight, aren't we? Yeah. So let's, you know, one thing Padma and I talked about was how this Patanjali book maybe differs from much of what's out there. That was great lasagna, by the way. Thank you. Lasagna showed up late last night at my door, sort of. Anyway, we talked about in the ways in which our book, what Swami has given us, maybe differs a little bit from other books. And there are lots of things you could say, but one of the things that she and I compared, and as you know, I've studied a lot of other commentaries. She hasn't really so much, but Swami, one comment I've made before is Patanjali, as far as I'm concerned, I was talking to Murli about when he lived, but it's really sort of irrelevant. As far as I'm concerned, this book belongs in Treta Yuga. It belongs for it's addressed to one whose consciousness is in Treta Yuga. And therefore, I think that's partly why Master never really, he talked incessantly about it, but he never really wrote anything. It's a glaring exception. And so Swami did this at the end of his life, and he simplified it in an essential way for our ears to hear. Because it's true that when you read a lot of the other commentaries, they really go off the top. And I want to make a distinction, therefore, between explaining, so to speak, commenting on what we read, trying to explain and understand it, and realizing it. And there's a big difference there. Last week we talked about the 4 stages of meditation, and I tried my best to make it more real to those of us who meditate. But when you read some of the commentaries, they really get over the top about some of these very esoteric aspects. One of those is in stanza 19 that Swami completely ignored, and there are several instances of this. Stanza 19, which we're not going to do, but is usually interpreted to say that when a yogi does not achieve realization in that lifetime, that he, she, may go on to become, and I'll use my words, one of the elementals. And so the intellectual commentaries just go ballistic. They're talking about, you know, the gods and the deities and the rakshasas, well, not the rakshasas, the devas and so forth. And in other words, but think about it, it's an interesting thought. As our consciousness expands beyond the ego, but let's say we're not fully in samadhi, fully realized, where do we go when we leave this body? If we've overcome many of our earthly desires, we'll call it, you might incarnate into one of the deities who rule different aspects of the universe. And the comment is often made that, like Zeus or somebody, one of these fellows, it's simply a role. It's like the President of the United States. The name changes every 4 to 8 years, but the position stays the same. And so it is that the belief is that these souls take these positions in nature, the elements of in nature, the gunas and so forth, and take on these roles until their perhaps desire, interest, attunement with those archangel-type roles wanes, and then they have to come back and work their stuff out. Well, Swami didn't comment on any of that. I mean, it's fun, it's interesting, but like, what good is it? And so it's an example of what I mean. He just wasn't going to bother with that sort of, and it really is, speaking of gossip, it really is mostly speculation. Only a self-realized master can really go there. And I don't suppose our Guru, Yogananda, actually commented on stanza 19, at least to that degree. Okay. The other thing is that, when we talk about the Eightfold Path, we talk about the different stages. We talk about them being limbs, yama, niyama, etc. But Swami has pointed out in the lessons for the Raja that it's holographic, because spirit is always omnipresent. And that as we develop as souls, we might be strong in one of the arms of the Eightfold Path, but weak in others. So have some of our problems with some of the yamas, and yet be able to hear Om and go deep in the sound of Om. And so one comment was with the example of the different stages of doubting that I talked about right at the very end, doubting and then embracing and then feeling the joy of that and then going beyond the particular form of that meditation into the being aspect that, well, it doesn't always happen to me that way. Well, that's not the point. Nothing in infinity is like Krishna and the rope. These are simply examples. And so it's important that we try to tune into this with intuition, not with literalness. Because you have to say something, but you can't say everything. Okay? So it's part of the details. All right, so stanza 20.
I'll read the English and then the Sanskrit. I want to point out that the Sanskrit thing, the reason we are going through that, there is a vibrational quality to it. So while it might perhaps sound like gibberish, it may be helpful to go behind that and tune into the vibrational quality of it. So let me begin with the English for 20. For others, that highest state is attained through faith based on experience, strength of will, mindfulness, retaining constantly the awareness of God's presence, conditioned oneness, sabhikalpa samadhi, and discrimination. In Sanskrit, Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna Purvaka, iti resham. Let's meditate on this. For others, that highest state is attained through faith based on experience, strength of will, mindfulness, retaining constantly the awareness of God's presence, conditioned oneness, sabhikalpa samadhi, and discrimination.
Swami makes a number of comments here, but I wanted to start with one of the earlier stanzas when we talked about our practice as even-mindedness and how the path that we walk spiritually, we sometimes get so focused on our techniques and on the fact that we meditate, let's say, as the central point, that it's easy for yogis, especially in the world, yogis in the world, to have kind of a gap between what happens during the day in our minds and hearts and what happens in our meditation. You know, Swami used to give that example frequently of the businessman in Vancouver he met who prized his meditation time in his meditation room and despised, so to speak, regretted his workaday activities. And that's a trap for us. To make that gap is to undermine both meditation and right attitude and right action. The goal of practice is even-mindedness, yes, but these qualities of faith, applying willpower in our work, understanding that success spiritually has in many ways much more to do, at least in terms of time and effort, with how we behave. And I think of Sri Yukteswar, whose motto was learn to behave. And though he spoke of esoteric things and in his book and so forth, when you read that wonderful chapter 12, it's probably one of the best chapters in the book of autobiography, My Years in My Master's Hermitage, he was so practical. And he was so much learn to behave. And so that's largely what this stanza's talking about. We're going to come to a few other things I'm tempted to talk about, but I'm not going to. Swami talks about willpower and our karma as having sort of two sources. One being our lower nature and the delusive hypnotic power that surrounds us in any culture or any given life and so forth. And then there are our own spiritual tests that come to us at our request, you know. We talk about how Kriya and so forth in the spiritual path generally applied with intensity will accelerate our spiritual tests, meaning our path. And so we can't necessarily distinguish the two, but turning that around instead of being a burden and seeing each as the velvet glove, as the will of God, as the Spirit guiding us, sometimes gently, but more often not so gently, with our tests, is an act of faith in the ultimate goodness of our circumstances that we face. And it seems like the grass is always greener, even in Washington State, somehow on the other side of the fence. And that is one of the great delusions that I think we all suffer from. If only, and then you fill in the blanks, and so on. So faith in the rightness, and that's what the New Agers mean when they say, "Oh, everything's perfect." I hate hearing that. It's such a stupid thing to say. It's far from perfect, but what they really mean, and which I do appreciate, is that we get what we deserve. I prefer to put it that way because it's a little more self-honest and blunt, which is more my own style. But yes, it's perfect. We get what we need. And when we develop the faith that exactly things are in my life what I need to learn, then we draw on and we develop and we channel the willpower that helps us to carry on and meet our challenges, whatever they might be. Mindfulness, I don't have any particular comment on. It's one of the hardest things to do, day to day, minute to minute, hour to hour during the day. And there's many different techniques for that. He doesn't dwell on that particularly, but it's in here that he gives that meditation on space that I actually did last week and we talked about here tonight. I find it interesting that the last item, even after Sabhikalpa Samadhi, and it may not be significant that it's the last, but the way Swami explains it implies that it is discernment. That we never lose our discernment even in cosmic consciousness, because after all, what are you going to lose in cosmic consciousness? It's impossible to lose anything in infinity. Everything is there. And I think that's useful for some people on the spiritual path, some percentage. I don't know what the percentage is. In principle, those who go more by heart, by devotion, by feeling, often lack discernment. That's kind of a broad general statement. Because on the other hand, deep feeling is discernment. It's the essence of discernment. So it always seems to balance out. But nonetheless, discernment is something that I found and I really mean I, because it's, you can only learn what you need to learn, but what I gained from my time in life with Swami Kriyananda and his example, I felt he was often teaching us discernment, often saying things that, some people would think shouldn't be said about another person. But he would do that to develop our discernment and not to be held back in that discernment, confusing judgment with dislike, confusing discernment with judgment, which is dislike. It isn't necessarily that, but that's what we mean when we use the word nowadays, judgment. We presume dislike. But being able to see first others' shortcomings can help, and it's a lot more fun to see others' shortcomings than our own, but that develops in us the capacity to see those and eventually to see our own as well, and to learn with the scalpel of discernment to not be judgmental about that is very, very important, because it's part of the yoga's citta. To be able to see the world as one of the stanzas we'll come to much later, probably not this week, like a crystal, to be a crystal reflecting what is real around us. Just like Swami talked about how Master would be with one person and he'd sort of look like him, and then he'd be with another person, he'd sort of look like her, and that ability to reflect that consciousness and so forth is part of this discernment. So let's go on to stanza 23.
Otherwise, through devotion and complete self-offering to God, this highest samadhi can be attained. Ishvara pranidhanadva. Otherwise, through devotion and complete self-offering to God, this highest samadhi can be attained.
Marty, isn't Ishvara Pranidhana one of the niyamas?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. How do you say it? Draupadi? Draupadi?
Draupadi.
Huh?
Draupadi.
Draupadi. Oh. You guys don't speak right. I think of that lovely story from the Mahabharata that Swami used to like to tell of, what's her name? Draupadi. When asked by Krishna, when advised by Krishna that she should practice yoga, she said, "I would, Lord, but I can't keep my mind off you." And that's the kind of devotion that we're talking about. And it's an interesting contrast to what we just said about discernment. But it isn't really, and that's the trick. Because that complete self-offering to us brings us to the God's eye view of what's real. There is no distinction ultimately between bhakti and jnana, because they meet in intuition. Master has this, most of you have heard the various CDs of Master's voice, but there's that one I've played before at events where Master talks about intuition being the two arms of the magnet. Anybody remember that? And the magnet being here and here, and that they meet at the medulla. And then it's an odd image, and it's in contrast to other things that can be said and have been said about intuition and its source. But nonetheless, it's the meeting of the two that brings that truth. But the more important of them is the energy of the heart center. And so there isn't ultimately any distinction. But I found this interesting, this part, because this is where Swami did two. Did two interesting things. One is he puzzled why Patanjali seems to ignore attunement with the Guru, and then he adds puzzlement about himself, about all these qualities that had just been listed in the prior stanzas. I just sort of laughed because what of these things, faith, willpower, mindfulness, discernment, oneness, did Swami not exhibit in his life? What was he talking about? Now, there were some other stanzas we didn't read that, I forget what they said now, I could look them up, but I went through them, and he exhibited in his life all of those qualities. So, who knows? But it is true. I remember in my first reading of Patanjali, there isn't that much overt in the way that we describe it and in the way Yogananda and other great teachers have about the importance, including Shankaracharya, including the need and importance of the Guru, is not stated quite so up front by Patanjali. So Swami didn't comment on it, and why should I? But there it is. It's a peculiar aspect of it. Okay. So we're going to do 24, 5, 6, 4, through 27.
So I'm going to read multiple of those. I'll read the English first and then the Sanskrit, because there is a flow to it in either language. Ishvara is the Supreme Self, unaffected by any affliction, karma, action, consequence thereof, or impression of desires. In him is fully developed the seed of omniscience. Unconditioned by time, he is the supreme instructor of even the most ancient of teachers. The expression of Ishvara is the hidden sound of Om. Klesha karma vipakshayayir aparamrishtaha purusha vishesha Ishvaraha. Tatra niratisyam sarvagnya bijam sapurveshamapi guruhu kalena vacchedat tasya vachakaha pranavaha. Ishvara is the Supreme Self, unaffected by any affliction, karma, action, consequence thereof, or impression of desires. In him is fully developed the seed of omniscience. Unconditioned by time, he is the supreme instructor of even the most ancient of teachers. The expression of Ishvara is the hidden sound of Om.
I see that should say stanza 24, not 23. Well, here, of course, Patanjali speaks forthrightly of the great metaphysical teaching that all is consciousness. And the seed of that is both fully developed in all things and at the same time unaffected by all things. This is perhaps one of the great paradoxes, the great mysteries in the precepts of metaphysics down through the world. Some in some religions and teachers, in order to resolve it, like much of Christianity, describe God as wholly other, because trying to bring the two together is the intellect simply can't do it. How can it be and yet not be at the same time? But he states it rather openly, and the bridge that he gives, as we all know from the teachings of Vedanta and Yoga, is the vibratory experience and presence of Om. Om is the link, pranava, between the vibratory sphere, the link meaning of spirit. It's that which reveals Spirit's presence, unaffected. Why it's called in the Christian traditions the Blessed Virgin, virgin meaning untouched, unafflicted, untainted, like the stem cell before it differentiates, has no characteristics, and yet it's omnipresent, it's immanent, it's in all things. But nonetheless, you can talk around it all day. There is no way to resolve it through the intellect with a noun, verb, and an object. It's only by the inner experience of Om. Here, like in the Bhagavad Gita, he talks about the chanting of Om. And he talks about several things, but in the word what is the short A sound. And in the middle sound of akar, ukar, makar, we're going to talk about Brahma, what's his name, Vishnu, and Shiva in a minute. And then like in moon, and then finally the closed lips of a like so. And when the human voice activates on its own, unconditioned, when the mouth closes, and when it seals, so for fun, what, like in what, short change the wa and hit the ah. Now short change the M in moon and do moon with, and drop the N. Moo, like a cow. Moo. And finally M, hum, hum. Try to put it together. It has a nice feeling to it. You should feel your chest reverberate. We tend here at Ananda, we don't do much with the M, and we do as pure O. We go Om. Oh, we won't even do the M. Om. Like that. We're not really doing it correctly. Okay? It should be, and now we'll exaggerate, and it should get subtler than this, but feel the vibration of the again. Isn't that far more pleasing than what we usually do? What it is think of it as the mouth. The mouth is doing this. The hard part is you don't want to. I've heard internet things where they go. It goes like this, like a cow in India chewing the cud. It's not like that. It's much more gentle, and the A part is the hard part, but it's. And the other thing is that we chant it all the time, but do we feel it? Or we just go, it's like a contest. Who's the last person standing? I wish some of you wouldn't do that. And you can only do that if you don't go to the M, because the M shuts you up. So when we chant together, don't be the kind of person who, when you're the last person doing it. It really drives me nuts. I get to do this class, so I can do a rant once in a while. There should be heart in it. And you should be bringing the Om in and feeling that vibration and converting that vibration to space. Let's do it. Feel it in the body. And feel Om in silence. That's what Om should be. It should be so inward that we, if not here in the real time, we feel that silence, which is Om. Now, Om, as we know, is personified by the deities Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Now, we know from our study of the Hindu way and Murli's exegesis in this respect, is that actually a word?
Apparently it is.
He knows the language way better than most of us, so when I need a word, I ask him. We know that Brahma was dismissed centuries ago because of his incestuous relationship with his daughter Saraswati. Just scandalous, really. And we're not going to talk about it because it's just taboo. So we can wipe him out, right? Okay. Then we know that there are how many incarnations of Vishnu?
10.
10. I should have asked you that, but you all know that there's 10 incarnations. Good Hindus know that there's 10 incarnations of Vishnu. Okay. Now, Vishnu's the top dog, and Shiva, being a renunciate, with his matted locks and being an anchorite and so forth, in popular culture, he's not that popular, you see, because nobody really admires somebody that, weird. And so, in popular culture, this is me speaking, of course, you know that, right? Don't be offended, please. Everybody loves Vishnu. He's the preserver. And the great incarnations like Krishna are incarnations of Vishnu. Even, do you know that Buddha is one of the 10 incarnations of Vishnu? You didn't know that, did you? Some of you knew that. And so Vishnu comes, as Krishna says, I incarnate when vice predominates to uphold Dharma. And so that's the role of the Vishnu incarnations. Shiva, of course, takes us out. He liberates us, okay? Vishnu brings us enlightenment, in a sense, and Shiva brings us, he's the liberator, and so forth. So in popular culture, in my view, in India, Vishnu is far more popular because he preserves the peace. He makes our world, at least in the popular view, more comfortable. Whereas Shiva is ready to kick the can out from under our seat. So having said that blasphemous sort of thing, I've asked Morley to explain what we learned on our trip to India about the rivalry between the other two fellows.
Well, it's just a little bit of a cultural introduction for you guys. This archetypally or otherwise, this rivalry has been around forever, at least for as long as Hindu scriptures have been written down. On the one hand is Shiva, who one of the places we went to in the pilgrimage is a place called Varanasi or Banaras or Kashi. I may have heard of one of those names at least. And it's an interesting city. The entire city exists to celebrate death. The centerpiece of the city, the place that you would go to visit, is a gigantic crematorium where dead bodies are cremated, and it goes on 24 hours a day, so people are being cremated right this moment, as they will all through today, and it's been written history says that it goes back 5,000 years at least, probably more, and that is the abode of Shiva. That is his city on earth. Vishnu, on the other hand, is the Lord of prosperity. His wife is Lakshmi, who really gives anything that one is supposed to want in real life. Shiva lives in the Himalayas, and we'd say he wears very little, but that's only for propriety. In reality, he's supposed to be naked. And he lives the life of a tapasvi, a sannyasi, where all he does is meditate. Vishnu, on the other hand, lives in the heavenly abode. He's depicted as lying down in an infinite ocean of milk on a gigantic serpent. I assume if you lie down on a serpent which is wide enough, it's pretty comfy, memory foam kind of thing. So Vishnu's serpent, interestingly, Patanjali is an incarnation believed to be of Vishnu's serpent, Ananda.
Oh.
Okay, you can take that to various places. But in general, these archetypes have been around, and you can... Followers of Vishnu, traditionally householders. Followers of Shiva, traditionally swamis, renunciants, and people of that ilk. Although today it can only be seen in symbolism, because in both places it's mostly, gold and material stuff. But underneath it all, it's kind of a reflection of these two aspects. There's a really charming story. It's very long, so I won't say any part of it, but the story essentially involves churning of the mind using the Kundalini serpent by the forces of good and evil. And in that, of course, all the vrittis in the mind begin to spring up. And when the good ones come up, so-called good ones, Amrita, the nectar of health, Vishnu gets it. And then the combined poison of all of our down-pulling vrittis, that's a poison that can burn the universe itself. Ishvara comes up, Shiva comes up and drinks it, and even he's unable to drink it, so the poison stuck right here. So one of the names of Shiva is the one with the blue throat. The blue is caused by the poison. So it kind of goes on and on at any level that you care to see in the Indian tradition. So if you start looking at those things, the daily pujas for Vishnu are usually made with the most luxurious of foods. It's incredibly luxurious, and it's amazing. So you go for prasad. Here's a little India secret for you. If you want to go get a prasad, go to a Vishnu temple. You get really good stuff. The prasad at Shiva temple is more elemental. You get nuts and dried fruits, if that. Often it's just a little bit of water with unknown provenance, so to speak. But nonetheless, it's kind of there in this archetypal way all across the country.
Thank you. Morley told us on the pilgrimage that his mother would not be pleased if he went in the great Shiva temple in Varanasi. So.
Yeah, I come from the Vishnu tradition. And by the way, all of Yogananda's brothers, including Master himself, are different names of Vishnu. Master's name Mukunda is a name of Krishna. Ananta, of course, is Vishnu's serpent. Patanjali, that's his eldest brother. Sananda is the good son, which is usually referred to for Krishna. And Vishnu, the last brother, is Vishnu. So it's an interesting factoid.
Yes. One of the things he points out here in the meditation communion with Om that is worth highlighting for our purposes, because we know Om has many different qualities and attributes, but one of them that we don't often talk about is the dissolution of ego in listening to Om. We listen inside the right ear, and it's quite close to the negative pole of the sixth chakra, and yet slightly elevated, isn't it? And so one additional reason, besides the communion with Divine Mother, besides the protection that is often talked about, the security that comes in Om, besides the knowledge that can be drawn through the practice of Om into the development of intuition and so forth, is this ego-transcendent attribute of Om. Yet another reason to practice it. Okay, let's move on to stanza 30.
Okay. Just pay close attention to this. Disease, dullness, doubt, carelessness, laziness, sensuality, false perception, missing the point, instability, and backsliding. These are the obstacles. Vyadhi, sthyana, samshaya, pramadalasya virati, Bhranti darshanalabdha bhumikatva chitta vikshepaste nyayaha. Disease, dullness, doubt, carelessness, laziness, sensuality, false perception, missing the point, instability, and backsliding. These are the obstacles.
Swami makes a number of very good points. Disease, I don't think, requires any comment on. If you have a toothache, it's very difficult to meditate. Having a healthy body is valuable. Tonight in the meditation I did, and I created a little pile of handouts if anybody is interested in what I did tonight. But what I was attempting to do was to emphasize, and I think I'll come back to it at another point, but it does seem to fit here, in terms of disease, is to emphasize the importance of our intention and efforts to go breathless, or to scale back from that, which is perhaps a high bar of putting it. In our meditation, we should pay attention to our heart and breath rate, and we should practice our pranayama, whether it be kriya, hong sa, and anything else, even chanting. We did a little chanting thing for Raja last night, and at kirtans too, I find that when you really get into chanting in a truly devotional inward way, it acts, at least on the body, in the same physiological way that pranayama does. I have found after a bout of chanting that sometimes I don't even practice kriya. I'm completely without need for breath. And of course other things in terms of devotion, but I'm just speaking physiologically here. And in any case, we should understand as yogis who do, and yoga is synonymous with pranayama, which is why I did tonight's chant. We are there, we strive to overcome the pull of breath that locks us into the physical body and into the report of the senses. And we should learn as yogis, we should be able to reduce our breath rate at will. We can do this through energization. You know, after running and jumping or whatever, we do the fencing. You should be able to stop your heart, even briefly. One time I went in for a colonoscopy many years ago, and they were doing this stuff. I don't know what it is anyway. And so I was sitting there, and I thought I'd have a little fun, and said, "Mr. McGilloway, where's your pulse? You all right?" I said, "Oh, just practicing some yoga." "Oh, okay." We should be able to do that. And if you don't, because many of you are long-term meditators, it's only because you've not paid attention. Getting the heart and breath rate down, in addition to other things like devotion, okay, fine, is how you're going to have a deeper meditation. you should be able to stop anytime during the day. That's why the exhalation of the breath at the end of the breath cycle is so immensely important. I don't know, does a double breath exist anywhere in the... I've never come across it in any other yoga book. I won't say Master invented it, that would be absurd. It's patently obvious, but you're shocking the heart into quietness. Okay? And so, with disease, it's very, too much caffeine, too much sugar, and that's not even disease per se, technically, but when we really have the flu, all of that affects our heart agitation and breath rate. You cannot easily, at least, without grace and so forth, transcend these impediments. And so focusing, that's why we watch the breath. But do we watch the breath? I doubt it. Really. Okay? That's essential. And its contribution to health goes without saying, at least for tonight. So let's talk about the other. Dullness and laziness are so tamasic. The only reason Patanjali could have listed them, because if they're chronic conditions, you're not going to be reading this stanza. So the only reason he could have possibly have listed is the fact that we all get a little lazy, don't we? And what's the other one? Doubt and so forth? Or dull? That's it, dull, right. And so what he's talking about is for people like you and I who have bouts of laziness and bouts of dullness, not chronically speaking. Okay? Carelessness is something you sometimes come across devotees who imagine that it's not necessary. Like Master said, he learned a few bad habits in the ashram in Benares. That to be spiritually meant you didn't have to pay much attention to your work or what you were doing in the moment. And he was cured of that by Sri Yukteswar. We should learn to concentrate, to pay attention, to do the details of our activities and work with mindfulness in the right way, as Larry talked about on Sunday. False perception, Swami makes an interesting point. I really like this. I want to explore it more personally. But he says, false perception comes by not seeing the forest through the trees, my expression, not his, but getting lost in the details. Isn't that interesting? We get a wrong perception of things because we get too narrowly focused. That's for all the Virgos out there. Sorry, the Virgos hate it when I pick on. I'm actually a Virgo, according to Vedic, so I can do that. Missing the point, as you all know, is the one I have the most fun with, but not much to say on there. But doubt is what I want to talk a little bit about. There's constructive doubt, which is asking questions, but then there's chronic doubt, of which Swami spoke of himself in past lives, perhaps, where everything you read, or your teacher, your guru, everything that anybody says, you immediately counter. And I've been very keenly aware of this for perhaps what I do and all the people I talk to, that there's a certain percentage of people, I don't care what you say. If I say, or anyone says, the sky is blue, that person will look around and say, well, look, there's a cloud over there. And it's a reactive process. And over the years of trying to tune into this tendency on certain people's part, I realized that it's based in fear. It's ego self-protectiveness. Because I'm afraid. You say something, and I might have to tune into it. I might have to reflect on it. It might actually be pointed at me. And so it's just easier to react and say the opposite. And by the way, I give up talking to such people because if I say anything, they're going to say the opposite. How dull. That's not a conversation. That's just a reaction. And you know what he says the cure for this sort of doubting Thomas is? Very interesting. Love of the heart. When you connect with somebody and you really accept them at full, I'll call it face value, Not sure what I mean by that, but it sounded right. When you're really with somebody, you listen to what they have to say in a conversation, perhaps, and you take it for what good there is in it. You don't have the nervous anxiety, the self-protectiveness, the fear-based need to critique and judge. What are you afraid of? Of being judged. What's the best defense? Judge first. Absolutely. So when you find yourself in casual conversations saying the opposite of somebody, that's your clue. And you're no fun to talk to besides. There's no meaningful exchange. Different points of view is different. A different point of view doesn't negate or do the opposite. It contributes another facet without invalidating what the other person said. A good conversationalist, what to mention someone with a good heart, will see the goodness and try to perceive intuitively where the person's coming from, meaning the truth they're relating to, and then maybe they'll add to it. Or if it's their role and to maybe even correct somebody, they'll do so in a way that the person can accept and will feel good about. So there's some things to meditate on, because I find that tendency with people who at least think of themselves as intellectual. But I find it as actually rather unintelligent way to converse and to think and to be. It's not creative at all. It's simply reactive. Yogas, chitta, vritti, niro. Don't react. Absorb, listen, take the sweetness out of the sand like the good ant, and then contribute something positively. And that's all heart quality. No fear. Do you see does that make any linkage for anybody? Okay. Greatest delusion is sensuality. I don't know, there's a lot to say about that in a crowd like this, but I have noticed, or not noticed, excuse me, I didn't mean that. I've puzzled over where moods come from when there isn't any obvious source of sensuality or habit of sensuality. And Master addressed this with Daya Ma when she was a teenager, saying it can be in the past. And Swami talks about here in the text, he says that the way to overcome that is to affirm strongly your willpower and to focus at the spiritual eye. Remember the story he liked to tell when he fell into a mood as a young monk and he couldn't talk his citizens out of it, and so he sat to meditate and put his mind forcefully here at the point between the eyebrows, and the mood I grew up in an area where we had fog all summer, California coastline. And you could see where the sun would burn off the fog by noon. Oh yeah, the sun's coming out around noon. Everybody kind of knew that. Then we'd go out and play baseball. A lot of fun. And so the image to me of the sun burning off the fog is what it feels like to me. The fog creating a dark mood, if you will, kind of confusion and doubt and moodiness. But the sun being here, you lift your gaze and hold it there until the fog dissipates. That image has always been helpful for me. Okay. What else is on there? I guess that's good. Krishna calls the doubter the most miserable of people, and he must have had a doubter in his life. He's pretty strong about that kind of thing. It wasn't Draupadi. Okay. Backsliding. Backsliding is... we have that chant. We never sing it because it's a little too personal, but I sing it a lot in the teaching that I do. Whither do they come here, and whence do they flit, and so forth. Is beautiful instrumental. We have seen, those of us who have been on this path and in our community for many years, we have seen many people come and go. Great, wonderful souls, many of them. It is easy to leave the path. Not all of them leave the path, admittedly, but some do. And Swami saw the revolving door of Mount Washington when the monks would come, especially the monks, because that's what he was in charge of, would come and things weren't to their liking. And as Master said on one of those CDs, and some of the people come here and they want to change us and not themselves. And so you do see people coming and going. And when you do things, you know, like some of us do with the public a lot, sometimes that's difficult because not that you get attached to people, I don't think, but you see the hope in their eyes, you see the bright light in their eyes, you see the enthusiasm. And then one day it flickers and they disappear. And it's hard. It's hard to watch. One of my deepest prayers have always been, Master, if I have to come back, I hope you'll find me quick, lest I get lost in the fog, since that's our image tonight of materialism once again. How many people come through those doors and say, yeah, I read autobiography. And I'm thinking to myself, 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago. And then I always say, well, what happened? And I know what the answer is going to be. It's always the same answer. So backsliding is, don't think you're free. Don't think you've made it. I don't care how many years you're on the path. Karmic bombs exist, and they can explode in your face. So be compassionate for those who leave the path and who have their troubles, and at the same time be humble enough to know that there but for the grace of God go I. And it's a very, very important lesson for all of us. We are not free, as Swami used to say repeatedly, we are not free until we have achieved nirvikalpa. So it's a good warning. Okay, 31. Oh, wait a minute. It's 9 o'clock. I better stop. I lost track of the time. Let's do this and see if there's anything sort of percolating, bubbling up there. Is anything rising to the surface?
I have a question I put over. So in Varanasi, in Blackberry's home, his family worshipped Lord Shiva, and presumably he did such as his fathers. And yet his guru is Babaji, and Babaji is an incarnation of Krishna. So there's all this stuff about rivalry.
So will you repeat that for this?
So the question was that Lahiri Mahashaya in his home worshipped Shiva, but his guru was Babaji, who is known to be an incarnation of Krishna, i.e. Vishnu. So what is the deal with all the rivalries?
I think Karen knows the answer to that. She's just trying to bug us.
I think that's you. Oh.
Well, because at their level, there ain't no rivalry. It's all the same to them. Is that good? Is that okay?
Works for me.
It's so easy, isn't it, when we go to India to get caught up in all this stuff. It's just mind-boggling.
Well, Lahiri's grandfather was named after Shiva and his father was named after Vishnu. So,
equal opportunity devotee. Okay. Anything else? Anybody got something perking on the brain?
That's probably the reason he was the one chosen to bring Kriya back. That is the stage.
Sounds good. Yes, Mr. Justin. Just one. Just one. What is that movie? Red October. Just one ping.
We meditate on space, and we breathe in space.
Oh, okay. Now I'm with you. Space. Okay.
Space. What would be an example of a meditation on time? How do we breathe in time?
You don't do that. You don't meditate on time because time doesn't exist. What's the matter with you? I actually have no idea. I've never meditated on time. Why would I meditate on time? I want to go to the eternal now.
What would that be?
Okay, well, think about it. Time and space relate to change. In meditation, as we move towards many things, but I'm going to stay with tonight's theme, as we move towards breathlessness, okay, the heart rate slows down, time slows down. Isn't it true you go into seclusion, those of us who seclude, you go on even a retreat, those of us who go on retreats, and it can just be like the weekend at Camp Brotherhood, and it seems like it's a whole different space and time, isn't it so? And so the meditation on time would be to transcend it, just like transcending the breath. As the breath slows down, the heart rate slows down, time slows down, because our experience of time is entirely the product of movement, of the speed of our heart, the speed of our thoughts, the intensity of our emotions and so forth. That produces time. Change produces time. And change is space, objects in space, separate objects in space that have movement. I've always loved the example of absolute zero. I'm not much of a scientist, but I can pretend. So that a plastic becomes a non-conductive material, becomes conductive as it moves towards absolute zero. Well, isn't that a wonderful analogy? As we move towards absolute stillness, we enter superconductivity in superconsciousness. I just love that image. And in my effort, speaking of breathlessness, we have the techniques, but it's really not just the techniques. You have to intuit. What does Master say? Something about intuition in the poem. By intuition.
Storm of Maya stilled by the magic wand of intuition. By the magic wand of intuition. Think about that. Meditate on that, because breathlessness is an intuitive state. It is the state of intuition. So when you're meditating, try to intuit breathlessness. You have to get the body, the physiology, like climbing Mount Everest without oxygen, which is exactly, by the way, what you're doing, except Everest is this mountain. You have to intuit space without time and change, which is breathlessness. So try to feel the onset of breathlessness as you do the pranayama in that. It's both. It's both objective and subjective. Do you see? Does that make any sense? Anyway, all right, we better end here. You said you had other things, but can you do this?
I can really quick.
All right.
I just realized something that I just want to confirm with you. Sensualism and moodiness is because sensualism is a hypnotic sort of a mesmeric sort of thing, and moodiness is sort of a hypnotic sort of a state.
I'm not catching the key words. Is sensuality what?
Hypnotic.
Hypnotic. Okay.
That experience of sensualism is a hypnotic experience, and that's why it transfers into moodiness, where you continue that hypnotic state.
I'm not sure I can comment on that, but I can definitely agree with you that it's hypnotic. The example I give is the 3 pieces of pie. By the time you get to the 3rd piece of pie when no one's looking, you're gone. You're zoned out. You don't even know where you are. You come out of it like, oh God, 3 pieces of pie? Absolutely. The more we do get involved with the senses, the self, that's why we're humiliated. That's why we're embarrassed. Because I disappeared. I went away. In my efforts to achieve a kind of oneness, I went the wrong direction. And so I'm embarrassed by what I just did. Now, where that fits in with mood, I'm not sure I can make that linkage, but I think to me, it's the hangover related to the state of subconsciousness, like a dark cloud that comes over us. And either we want to go back there, or we don't. We're ambivalent about our indulgence. Maybe not consciously, but there's a part of us that wants to sink. Aren't moods delicious in a certain way? And we want to indulge them. And in other ways, we don't. And so to me, it's like at least when I get moody, it's like a dark cloud comes over my mind. So that's as far as I can go. So, all right. Well, I've gone far enough. So let's have a moment of silence. Lift the dark clouds with the sunlight of the self. Om Shanti. Amen. On an announcement level, I noticed on the calendar that there are 5 Wednesdays this month, which means the 4th Wednesday we won't have a class. That's the 23rd is not a class because the 22nd is Kriya meditation. But then we come back on the 5th Wednesday, the 30th of October. So it's kind of a little bit odd.